Welcome again to our amazing stories about the origins of the people and the tribes of Kenya. And today we're talking about the Kalenjin story and origin. And this story is so interesting in a way that, again, people might believe or people might fail to believe. But again, let's dive in it. And at the end of it, I know you will make your own decision. This is just what people have come across and what people have written. And that's what we're going through. So the Kalenjin story is nearly identical in many other ways to that of ancient Israel. And there are questions we need to ask ourselves on this. Why is it that a certain central details of Kalenjin settlements in Kenya's Rift Valley have mythical counterparts in Israel's reported colonization of Canaan at the end of the 13th century before Christ? And why does the Kalenjin epic claim a sudden exodus from Egypt, a wandering for a long decades in the wilderness, the crossing of the river called Jordan, a mass circumcision of Pisgah, kept with the conquest of Jericho, Bethel, Ai, Hajar, and other cities of the Levantine natives, Levitical natives. Even more astonishing, how is it that for these events, Kalenjin traditions uses terminologies almost identical to that of the Judah's kingdom, Josiah, his chief priest Hilkiah, the Aradiator Ezra, and the other masterminds of what Bible students call the Deuteronomotics history. Strange? Yeah, it's getting strange over here. Today's Kalenjin equivalent of Soferim, those who wrote and edited the Jewish Bible in the 7th and 6th centuries before Christ, just before, during, and after the Babylonian exile, assert that the Kalenjin arrived in abrupt escape from Egypt. So they were the first people to escape from Egypt. They began to settle only after some 40 years of wandering in the wilderness of southern Sudan and northern Kenya. Quoting calls the mountain god, the Elgon. It was referred to the mountain god by that time. Divested of the Bible's thick ethnic self-aggrandizing gloss, it is true that certain Semitic tribes left Egypt abruptly after the period of imperialistic rule, known to historians as Hyksos, and including other immediate family of certain Yagub, Jacob, known in Kalenjin mythology as Yakober. I think most of the Kalenjins will be able to pronounce that word in a better way. That's Yakober. This Semitic tribe renamed itself Yosrael or Israel, after their leader had dreamed of an encounter with the god El at a place thereafter called Bethel or Bethel, or Bible scholars call it, the house of El. In Out of Egypt, Hamd Osman explains that the term Israel was derived from the Coptic god Azrael, a name that means oasis in God, or simply El Powers, the chief god of the Nilo-Hamatic Copts, Edomites or Canaanites. Known in the Pentateuch as Moses, Amenhotep the fourth was the pharaoh who triggered so much religious unrest by revolutionarily imposing a monotheism god Aten, for which reason he changed his name to Ahanaten and banned all other gods and goddesses. Wow, this history is really interesting. Egypt was electrified, but what archaeohistory now know is that in conflict with what we read in the Pentateuch and Deuteronomistic history, Moses abducted and fled, not because he had killed an Egyptian and hidden him in the sand, but only because the priest conspired to kill him on account of Aten, Okay, that is a different version of what the Bible says, but we'll rather believe in what the Bible says more than what other people are trying to say about it. If the Bible says he ran because he had killed an Egyptian who was fighting an Israelite, we want to believe in that. But okay, this is part of the history that we read and we learn. So we want to continue reading this interesting history about the Kalenjin tribe of Kenya. First, he went to South Nubia, his mother 30 years Midian country. There he married Athabis, the black beauty from Exodus, called Zipporah, or the Exodus called Zipporah. After assuming the pseudonym Moses, he asked back into Egypt via Midian and gave his Aten religion to his former Israelite slaves. In return for a promise to liberate them, they agreed to be recruited into an army which he then used to wage war on official Egypt to try to reclaim his crown. But he was routed and forced to flee once again, this time into Sinai's Sharia mountains. They call them the mountains of God, in Edomite country, to give rise to the legend called Exodus. Okay, the problem we have is that it is the Jewish descendants of those Israelites who are writing that story, and they are doing so after many centuries of oral traditions and with a great deal of ethnic self-glory. Yeah, that's why we said this one, it's not really adding up. Yes, it's not really adding up. It's just a fabrication of someone's idea about whatever happened and all that. But someone's trying to find self-glory or glorify himself in this. Okay, let's continue. The Pentateuch tells only the story of the small group that fled with Moses northwards. Historians now agree that the religious upheaval caused by the Akhenaten Moses occasioned exodus in all other directions. Some fled to West Africa, perhaps including the remarkable Dogon of Mali, Akan of Ghana, and Wolof of Senegal. Some fled to Crete, Peloponnesus, Thalassy, and Colchis, creating the legend of Jason's cast of the Golden Fleece. Some fled towards the Red Sea, later to emerge in Ethiopia as the Falasha Jews. If we zero in on the King Kalenjin, Luo, Masai, Teso, and Turkana, the question is, are they descendants of the Copts who fled southwards? Yeah, it's a question, so we need to ask ourselves that question and answer that question. The Kalenjin thesis seems to be that the Moyot, the maternal ancestor, moved out of Egypt southwards at about the same time as the Israelites were scurrying out of Egypt northwards. The linguistic evidence adduced by the Kalenjin counterparts of the Jewish Sopherim is telltale story. Compare the Pentateuch with the instance Kipkoech Arab Sampu's book, The Kalenjin's People's Egypt Origin Legend Revisited. If you can read that book, you'll clearly understand what these people are trying to talk about. And if you compare with what the Pentateuch talks about, maybe you'll get the truth out of it, or you'll find it to be a fallacy or a story that is meant to glorify someone onto that. But before we get to talk about the Kalenjins on how they are related to the story of Israel, let us try to summarize the Exodus story, the Bible Exodus story of the Israelites from Egypt to the promised land. Then after wandering for 40 years around a peak in Edom, known variously as Hor or Horeb or Sinai, or the mountain of God, they gave their new god Aten the name Yahoo. Take note of the name Yahoo, taken from the local Shashu Edomites. Finally, they arrived at the foot of Nebo or Pisgah, a Moabite hill on Jordan's east bank. Atop Pisgah, the Lord showed Moses the extent, beauty, and the economic prospects of the promised land of Canaan, but told him that he himself would never see the land. Then, following a mass circumcision ritual at Gilgal, the children of Israel crossed the river
They crossed the river to capture Jericho. As we turn to the Kalenjin version of the story, please keep in mind of the biblical terms that we use, that is Pisgah, circumcision, Gilgal, Jordan, Jericho, which we have just used. It was from a mountain called Sigis that the leader of the southern Exodus viewed the Kalenjin Canaan. On top of Pisgah, the term which gave his vanguard Kalenjin group its name Kipsigis, the leader viewed the whole range of what will become modern Kalenjin land from Koibatek and Nakuru to Lake Victoria. Because during the wandering, the Kalenjin people had had no time to circumcise their boys, the whole Kalenjin community was forced to camp somewhere called Tualap, Moniz, for a mass circumcision ritual. But a mass circumcision, of course, among Egypt's most important religious impositions on Israel was the Nilotic practice of chopping off the foreskin of the male organs. Among the Copts, it had been a bequest from the god Ra. Long after the Exodus, the Jewish writers of the Pentateuch would replace Ra with their own newfangled Yahweh as the god who had demanded the cut. But with the Sopherim, there is no attempt to explain the significance of circumcision, which is among the proofs that the Nilotic masters had imposed it on the Israelite slaves without explaining its religious significance to them. Indeed, the book of Joshua, again they're alluding to one of the biblical texts, the book of Joshua reports that all the male Hebrew who came out of Egypt were circumcised, but that those born during the wandering were not, and that a mass circumcision was thus performed on all the males at Gilgal in the plains of Jericho. Moses, a Levite, performed a mass ritual at Gilgal just before crossing the Jordan. Sambu writes the Kalenjin did not name the corresponding hill Gilgal. But it is interesting to note that one of the places the Kalenjin occupied twice while wandering in the plains of the Rift Valley was Gilgil. Which Kenyan has never heard of Gilgil, the thriving trade center between the lakes Naivasha and Elementaita. The Israelites then crossed a river called Jordan to take Jericho. But as Kipsigis crossed a river called Chorian to take Kericho. What can it mean? We pronounce the chi in Jericho as the K in Kenya. But narrative Jebusites, a clan of the Canaanite natives, pronounce it like the chi in church. The Jericho therefore rhymed with Kericho. So, what this person is trying to say is, Kericho is not pronounced as Kericho, but should pronounce as Chericho. Kericho therefore may originally have been Jericho. That's a lie, but okay, who knows? Which is not all far from Jericho. What a small world ours is. The only question is, who borrowed from whom? I think that's a question that you guys can ask yourself on the same. The nearly identity between Pisgah and Pisgis, Gilgil and Gilgal, Jordan and Chorian, Jericho and Kericho, etc., and the circumstances in which those terms occur affirm at least a historical confluence. Kalenjin, the Luo, ancient Coptic, ancient Canaanite, or Ugarito, Phoenician, and ancient Edomite belong to the same ethno-linguistic family known as Nilo-Hamites. The Nilo-Hamites had a profound influence on Hebrew, both when the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt 4 centuries in post-Exodus Canaan. The Pentateuch is chock full on religious imageries and vocabularies borrowed from Coptic. If the Kalenjin left Egypt at the same time as the Israelites, then that is a historical confluencer. In mind, Bogligley Salacious the Deuteronomistics. Hey, this is too hard to pronounce. The historian tells us exactly what terrible things the Israelites under Joshua did to the Canaanites, savage deeds which reverberated up to now as a Palestinian problem. The question is again, what happened to the Kalenjins, Canaanites? Oh, the Kalenjins are termed to be the Canaanites. The autochthonous Ogiek, Sirikwa, Dorobo cluster. From the way the Kalenjins react whenever faced with that questions, we can infer that the Ogiek's fate was in every way as horrendous as the Canaanites. Numerous fights, flights, deaths, assimilations, and adaptations. Those were exactly what happened also to the Philistines, Moabites, Ammonites, and Amorites after the Israelites had grabbed their lands. The difference is only by their euphemisms. The Kalenjins show at least a sense of remorse. The Hazi, usurpers of Judah, who now lord it over Palestinians, do not. Okay, that is a simple history of the Kalenjin people in Kenya. What is your take on that? Do you agree with that the Kalenjins are one of the lost tribes of Israel? Or it is just a story that someone is coming up to try to justify a given cause? Personally, I don't think so, because there is much of inconsistencies in that history in relation to what the Bible says, and that one makes it off for me. But I don't know what comes to your mind when you get to hear that. So let's get your comments in the comment section, and let's get to hear more on what you know about this. And again, have you ever heard of such a story, or the first time you're getting this story from me? Okay, we will keep on digging deeper to get to understand what happens and what happened, where and when and with who involved in it. Thank you so much. Keep it Alan Hoy, and keep subscribing.